Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a retired British Army colonel and former NATO commander of chemical, biological and radiological reaction troops. Welcome to our program, Colonel Hamish.
Thank you very much for having me.
President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has agreed to ceasefire deal in the air and at the sea. If Russia also is open to this ceasefire proposal, what is your reaction to this development?
Well, I think it's been a very difficult time, really, over the last 5 or 6 days, and don't want to go over old ground, as it were. You know, I think President Zelensky was very badly treated in Washington by President Trump and Vice President Vance, and the cutting off of American aid, military aid, is something that is really unhelpful. The American president seems to forget that President Putin of Russia is the aggressor here. It is the Russians who invaded Ukraine in 2014. It's the Russians who invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. So I think the reaction by the US president is really most unhelpful. But what it has done, I think, is galvanized us in Europe to realize that we must play a much more leading role in the defense of Europe, and Ukraine is absolutely part of Europe in this case. And going forward, the European armies and militaries, I'm delighted to say, led by the UK and the British Prime Minister, need to step up to support Ukraine. When it comes to the peace, as you say, President Zelensky is starting to talk about the first stage of a peace plan with a ceasefire in the air and on the sea. Now, I think what President Trump and others who are critical at the moment are forgetting is that the Russians are the ones who have to agree to a ceasefire, and they've said nothing at the moment. The Russian army, to me, is in a very bad state, and actually, I'm sure this sort of break, as it were, created by what's been happening in Washington, is allowing Putin to try and regroup and regather his forces. But I think what President Zelensky has said today is a really constructive start. And certainly peace in the air would mean the end to any missiles and drones being fired by the Russians at Ukrainian civilians, causing so much damage and creating so many casualties. And peace in the sea, which actually Ukraine pretty much controls the Black Sea anyway, is a really good first step. And if Putin is serious about peace, he should agree to it very quickly so that we can then get on to the next stages. This war has gone on far, far too long. The Russians have really been allowed to get on and do what they like. And although it's very unfortunate, I think what the Americans and President Trump, and I would say the majority of Americans I speak to, do not support some of the things he and his vice president are saying, that at least there is the opportunity for a ceasefire. But whatever deal is going to be done must be something that the Ukraine people can agree to.
Also, like to cover with you this a ceasefire plan. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is ready to deploy boots on the ground and planes in the air as a part of a ceasefire deal. What is your take on such plan, and is it possible to conduct this mission without American backstop, without US backstop?
Well, I think there are two options here. First of all, there is an option where a European coalition force led by Britain and by France put troops on the ground, sufficient amount, 30 to 40,000 troops, and they must have enough military grunt, as it were, armored divisions to be able to oppose any potential Russian incursions. And in the first instance, the ideal situation would be if the US provided the air power to maintain air superiority with US fighter jets and missiles and others to cover that force. If the US is not prepared to do that, then the European NATO coalition must stump up. And I think what Europe needs to make abundantly clear to both President Trump and President Putin that we are prepared to do this. And I personally believe that there is enough military capability within the European NATO coalition to do this. The air forces of Finland and Sweden, Britain, France, Greece, Germany, and some of the other smaller European countries, I think, have enough fighter jets and missile defense to provide this air cover, but it's not ideally. So that is the option. I think it's very doable. A lot of planning has been going on in London and Paris and elsewhere to make sure that this force is ready. And of course, the European NATO countries have been doing a lot of training together over the last 12 months to 2 years. So they are ready to do it. This will be a huge commitment for the British and French militaries, but it is essential, I think, to get peace and stop innocent Ukrainian civilians being killed on a daily basis by the Russians. Ideally, we'd like the Americans involved, but I think we can, in Europe, do it ourselves and provide a sufficiently robust force to deter Putin and the Russians from trying to gain any more land.
From your perspective, how should British, French and other European troops retaliate if Russia violates a ceasefire deal, if Russia attacks Ukraine again, and if Russia attacks European troops?
Well, when the ceasefire force is set up and the line of demarcation between Ukraine and Russian forces is set up, there must be very clear rules of engagement. In other words, what happens for exactly the scenario that you're talking about. What is absolutely clear and fundamental is that any European peace enforcement force must have the firepower, the tanks, the artillery, the drones, and the air power to be able to stop any Russian incursion. And I think that it clearly can have if we put enough forces on the ground. Of course, it's a huge area. The demarcation line is likely to be about 800 miles long. So it's a huge area to cover. But with sufficient firepower, I think that a European coalition, ideally supported by American air power, can do that. And the Russian army itself is much denuded. They've just passed 1 million casualties. It's clear that they're not very well trained now. So I think a very well trained European NATO armored division, infantry division, would have the capability, and also with the intelligence assets that Europe and the US have, to be able to either hopefully deter the Russians from doing anything, and if they did do something, to hit them really hard very quickly.
And do you feel that European countries are capable of hitting Russia very hard without American involvement?
Well, I think it will be more difficult without American involvement. But yes, I'm pretty clear that we could do this. You know, British and French, all the British and French and the Nordic countries' armies are highly trained. They have a lot of very sophisticated kit, and a lot of the kit is American kit, F-35 fighters, etc. So yes, I think they do have the ability. It will be about the rules of engagement. And also, I think Prime Minister Starmer and President Macron are making it clear that they are up to the task and prepared to do it. And they must be. Unless Russia believes that, then the force will not be effective.
From your perspective, what are the options for the US government for their involvement in such mission? Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, is trying to persuade Trump to commit to such mission, for example, by staging air assets in the countries near Ukraine on standby in case of Russia's any Russia's attack against Ukraine, the US could, for example, retaliate with air assets and long-range capabilities. What are the US options for this mission?
Well, the key option, we hope, is that US air assets will be committed to any peacekeeping force. There's some significant US assets, air assets, fighter jets, etc., already stationed in the United Kingdom in 3 very large air bases and across Europe as well. And one would hope that they will be the guarantor of air power to this peace enforcement force. So that is really what I think Prime Minister Starmer is trying to convince President Trump to commit to the fight. But we also must plan for a worst-case contingency where Trump doesn't. But I think also as part of President Zelensky's peace proposals, he's also indicated that he is prepared to look at the rare earth minerals deal that President Trump seems so keen on. And one anticipates if that deal can be agreed, then in the transactional way that Trump seems to do political and diplomatic business now, then once Trump has access to Ukraine minerals, Ukraine or the coalition peace force would have access to US air power.
Also, US Vice President J.D. Vance says that economic cooperation with the US would be the best security guarantee for Ukraine. He is confident that European allies are not capable of conducting such mission because he said, quote, that they haven't fought wars for 30, 40 years. What is your reaction to such misinformation, lies from J.D. Vance?
Well, there are 2 things here. Firstly, the comments of J.D. Vance, which I've written about extensively in the British press. For a person who has fought in the Gulf Wars, in Iraq and Afghanistan and Bosnia and Kosovo wars, with a lot of my colleagues, we're pretty vexed by what Mr. Vance has to say. And although he was apparently a soldier once, I think his combat experience is very limited. So it was an unfortunate comment. Mr. Vance seems to say things first and then think later, because of course he's now retracted that comment, saying he didn't think it was the case that British and French soldiers had not been in combat. So I think that's unfortunate, but it wouldn't really matter. But the fact that he's vice president of the USA is a huge concern if that is his judgment. I think on the first point that you mentioned about Ukraine having security by doing business with the US, I think he believes that if there are US personnel in Ukraine, maybe working in the mines and other areas of business, helping with reconstruction, then Putin wouldn't attack for fear of injuring or killing US personnel. And there is some merit in that. However, there were lots of US personnel in Kuwait in 1990 when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So that's not necessarily a definite guarantor. But as far when it comes to experience of the British and French military, I personally have been fought in 7 different wars, and a lot of my colleagues are similar. So we're a lot more experienced than Mr. Vance in combat, so perhaps he should stick to politics.
Let's cover also nuclear option of the Russian side. If there is a European peacekeeping mission, European deterrent force in Ukraine, what are the chances of Russia using nuclear weapons against European troops?
Well, that is a very good question. I think it's overall, I think it is highly unlikely. Firstly, I say that because both Britain and France have a nuclear deterrent, although it is much, much smaller than the Russians. The combined nuclear weapons of Britain and France are enough to annihilate Russia anyway, and Putin will know that. There is some discussion that the Russians might try and use tactical nuclear weapons. These are smaller ones, to take out particular armoured formations and others. Again, I think this is highly unlikely. The French do have some tactical nuclear weapons, so could respond. But I think, as we've discussed on your programme before, the launching of any tactical nuclear weapons, I think a coalition NATO peace enforcement force would have the capability with the weapons like Storm Shadow to prevent them being launched. So I personally think the nuclear issue, as we've discussed many times before over the last 3 years, is a non-issue, because Putin knows that the moment he flexes his nuclear weapons, that is the end of it. And that is not what we understand he wants to achieve. So, yeah, I think that the chance of a nuclear exchange is very remote.
But don't you think that Russia could try to challenge, to test the readiness of European troops by conducting, for example, false flag operations or small incursions? What is your take on that?
Yes, I think that's very likely, and I am sure that the coalition troops will be contingency planning for that. And if there is any slight incursion, it's very important that the coalition force hits it very hard. When it comes to false flag, that is more difficult, of course, but that is where intelligence is key. Of course, we rely very heavily on US intelligence to provide a clear picture. And one would, that it is pretty essential that intelligence still goes on. Although, having said that, among the UK and France and the other NATO European countries, they still have a very considerable intelligence gathering capability. But the key thing is, if there is any transgression of the ceasefire rules, then it is hit very hard indeed.
And also, do you expect European troops, European air assets, and, for example, if this is a case, American air assets to help Ukraine to close a sky over Ukraine, to help Ukraine to deter and also to intercept Russia's missiles in case of a large missile attack on Ukraine?
Well, I think there are two elements to this. If there is a ceasefire in place, yes, absolutely, coalition air assets would take out any incursions into Ukraine by Russian missiles or drones or jets. As far as Western assets supporting Ukraine, if there is no ceasefire, then that is something that we must consider, because if there is no ceasefire and the fighting continues, I expect particularly the European NATO coalition must reevaluate how they support Ukraine. What is very clear in the West, in Europe, is that we cannot afford, we will not allow Russia to take Ukraine completely. So there is a scenario, and it's a worst case scenario, where British and French troops might have to be on the ground to support Ukraine against Russia, and fighter jets in the air. I would add that that is worst case scenario, but if there is a ceasefire in place, absolutely coalition air power would take out any missiles fired at Ukraine.
But would coalition forces have enough air defense systems to protect, for example, its own troops on the ground in Ukraine? Because Prime Minister Keir Starmer is also trying to convince Trump to provide European allies with additional air defense assets. What is your opinion on that?
Well, we're getting into some sort of quite technical detail, and being a soldier, I'd never sort of professed to completely understand the air environment, as it were. It is a very good point that you make, but I am sure that the British and French and the European coalition would not want to deploy troops into a ceasefire line without the right air defence cover. It's a technical issue. I intuitively think that with all the air assets that are available in Europe, it is possible, but of course it would be far easier with the Americans providing the backstop and the support to cover the air. But if that's not the case, then Europe is going to have to do the best it can.
And what could happen if Russia, for example, attacks Ukraine not from the Russian territory, but, for example, from a territory of Belarus? How should European allies respond?
Well, I think it's the same deal with the ceasefire. The rules of engagement will be very clear, and I'm sure they will say any incursion into Ukraine by the Russians will be dealt with severely by a European force, whether that's across the contact line between Ukraine and Russian forces, or whether it's through a second country like Belarus.
Also, let's cover the topic on the war in Ukraine on the ground. Russia's offensive on the east of Ukraine has been slowed down by the Ukrainian army. Ukraine tries to stabilize the front lines. Do you feel that this development can force Russia to seek peace in the nearest future, to agree with ceasefire proposal, because their offensive operations have been slowed down?
Well, certainly it would appear across the front at the moment things are pretty quiet. And people should not forget, of course, that Ukraine holds an area of Russia as well in Kursk, where their operations have failed and stalled. So it gives some advantage to Ukraine. I personally think that in what we call in military terms, the Russian army has culminated. In simple words, it means that it's run out of steam, run out of power. It really can't go much further. So I think any negotiations that happen between Ukraine and Russia, then that needs to be made very clear, because there is obviously some detailed negotiations over land to consider. The Russians have taken 4 oblasts and, of course, the Crimea. And at the moment, Ukraine holds an area in Kursk. So there will be negotiations on what the ceasefire line looks like. But I think the world needs to understand that certainly my personal view is that the Russian army is pretty much spent at the moment and would be pushed to really make much more gains if the war carried on and the West did nothing to support Ukraine.
Thank you, Colonel Hamish, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much for having me. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava. Thank you very much. Jake Bro is a YouTuber who covers the war in Ukraine on a daily basis, and also US Air Force veteran. Welcome to our program, Jake.
Daniel, thank you for having me back on.
As the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year, how can you assess the stage of the war in Ukraine right now, also as Donald Trump also looking forward to end this war by making the deal? What is your reaction to this, and how can you assess current stage of the war?
Well, on the ground, neither side are really moving. It was almost 6 months ago now that people were talking about the imminent capture of the city of Pokrovsk, but Ukraine has been holding them off now for 6 months. So on the battlefield, Ukraine is doing fantastic. Russian logistics are a nightmare. We're seeing pictures and videos of the Russians using camels and donkeys to get supplies to the front lines. So the real battle happening right now is in politics. Can the Western alliance retain the political will to keep supporting Ukraine at the necessary levels? So I know with the headlines, what's dominating right now is Donald Trump. He's now been in office for a little over a month. And yeah, there's a lot of questions and uncertainty about future aid for Ukraine, as well as the world's relationship with the Russians. Are we going to break isolation? Are we going to normalize relations with a brutal regime that has killed hundreds of thousands of people? And as an American, I hope that's not the case. I hope we don't move to normalize relations with the Russians. They should remain isolated until Putin gives up on his imperial ambitions.
US President Donald Trump says Vladimir Putin will make concessions. What is your reaction to this statement? And does this mean that Russia can no longer sustain this war? Do you believe in that?
The two things that the Russians want the most from Donald Trump is to stop delivering military aid and weapons and to lift all sanctions on Russia. And these talks happening in Saudi Arabia, we don't know what the outcome will be. I hope we don't lift sanctions. I hope we continue delivering military aid. But Donald Trump does his own thing. He doesn't care about the things that traditionally democracies care about. He doesn't care about human rights. He doesn't care about the sovereignty of nations. He's entirely transactional. So at the moment, Donald Trump is trying to talk to the Ukrainians and talk to the Russians and see how he can maximize benefit for himself. He's not interested where the borders are drawn. He doesn't care how many people have died. He doesn't really care about Ukraine. And I also think he doesn't really care about Russia. He only cares about how can he benefit himself to the maximum extent. So he's talking about this mineral rights deal with Ukraine, which I think President Zelensky will sign on Friday. We can get into the details to the best I understand them if you'd like. But
Sure.
also now I'm hearing Russia is talking about an aluminum deal with the United States. This is shocking to me. Vladimir Putin is saying he's willing to open up to U.S. investments, to American companies to help extract natural resources from the occupied territories of Ukraine. And Donald Trump being purely transactional, a person who doesn't care about human rights or democracy. Donald Trump is interested. What can you offer me? Trump only cares about money and dollars, not human lives, unfortunately.
Do you feel that Vladimir Putin has already understood that he made a terrible mistake in 2022 by invading Ukraine? Don't you think that he has finally understood that now is the right time to stop the war, and he has a good chance to do that with Donald Trump? He can demonstrate this as a victory for him, but also can use Trump to survive, to save his own regime.
It's an interesting question. If Vladimir Putin could go back in time to 2022, knowing that it wouldn't be a special 3-day military operation, knowing that it wouldn't take 2 weeks tops, I don't know, because I think Russia has found, or at least Vladimir Putin has found a benefit to this war in that he's tested his people. Are his people willing to die for him at the rate of hundreds of thousands? You know, by the time this war officially ends, more than a million Russian soldiers probably will have died. And I think for a brutal dictator like Putin, he was concerned. You know, if he initiated these wars and people started dying, would his people rise up against him? That is the ultimate fear of any dictator. Will they storm the palace and then murder my entire family? And we've learned the last 3 years that the Russian people are entirely passive. They're entirely docile. They're willing to go along with any levels of brutality and crimes against themselves. The 3-year anniversary was this week of this invasion. And the only report I could find of Russians marking the anniversary or protesting was an 83-year-old woman in St. Petersburg. One 83-year-old woman was the only person in the entirety of Russia, 3 years into this disastrous war, that was willing to speak out and protest against Vladimir Putin. So, yes, Putin's economy has been wrecked, his military has been destroyed, but he's tested the boundaries of what can he get away with, both from the international community and from his own people. And I imagine at the moment, Vladimir Putin has to feel like a god. He has to feel like he's untouchable and can do anything he wants going forward. There are no international standards. There are no international norms that he has to adhere to or respect anymore going forward. Unfortunately, that's the world we now live in. I preferred to the world we were living in 4 years ago, in which people did care about international norms and respecting the sovereignty of nations. And there are no rules going forward, unfortunately. And I think this will lead to more destabilizing events, more chaos, more death, more confusion. I'm hoping that there's some way we can turn the tide in the political realm and reach Donald Trump and convince him not to go along with this, not to accept the new rules dictated by Vladimir Putin, how nations should treat each other, how the world should view itself. Because, yeah, this is generally not good for ordinary people like you and me when dictators say, I can redraw the maps, I can kill whoever I want to kill, I can take whatever I want to take. Might equals right, and I'm in the right as long as I have the power.
But US President Trump is confident that Putin will make concessions. Why does Trump think Putin is ready to concessions? Do you really believe that Vladimir Putin will make some concessions during negotiations right now?
That's a lie. Donald Trump is not really asking Putin for any concessions, and Putin is not willing to give any concessions. The Russians will always make absurd maximum demands. Vladimir Putin could say, I want control of everything all the way to Portugal. And then Donald Trump will say, well, will you negotiate? And I'll just give you all of Ukraine. And then Russia will say, okay, I'll willing to scale back my ambitions, wanting to go to Portugal or all the way to East Berlin. I'll accept just the Baltics, Moldova, Ukraine, Armenia, whatever. With the Russians, they have no right to anything. They have no right to this land. They have no right to these people, and they know that. So the Russians have been doing this really for centuries, just lying during the negotiations, demanding the maximum, and then waiting for weak political leaders to give them concessions. And then they argue that it was some kind of tough deal that they negotiated when they walk away something that they had no right to. And they've done this every single time. There is no treaty that Russia will sign that they will respect. There is no ceasefire that Russia will sign that they will respect. They will violate them at their first convenience whenever they think it's to their benefits. The Russians are liars, they're criminals, they're murderers, they're savages, and nobody should be taking anything they say or do seriously because they will never negotiate in good faith. They are terrible, terrible people.
So you're confident that if there is a ceasefire deal struck between Ukraine and Russia, Kremlin will violate this deal in any time in the future?
100%. If there is a ceasefire, and Ukraine knows this, General Budanov knows this, President Zelensky knows this, that if they do agree to some kind of ceasefire this year, Russia's not going to stand down. They're not going to demobilize their troops. They're not going to divert resources that going to the military back to civilian programs. Putin is in it to win it. He's getting no resistance from within his ruling elite and the country. And he's going to go for the Baltics. He's going to formally annex Belarus. He's going to go for the Suwalki Gap in Poland. He's going to go for Moldova. He wants all of Ukraine. All of Ukraine. Not just the parts he currently controls. And this can be a century-long project. Putin doesn't care. Perhaps he will die in the next 10 years of natural causes, and whoever his successor is can carry the mantle of Putinism and the rebirth of the Russian Empire. 500 years from now, when Russia controls half of Europe and Central Asia and the Caucasus, statues to Putin will be erected all across the Russian Federation. That's what he thinks about. That's what he sees. When you have this level of power and wealth and control, you start thinking about your legacy. You start thinking like Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great or Julius Caesar thought. It's about empire. It's about megalomania. These people don't care how many people die, both of the people they're invading and their own troops. It's just about their own insatiable lust for power. It's disgusting.
Also, General Budanov, the head of Ukrainian military intelligence, says that Ukraine and Russia are likely to strike a ceasefire deal this year. What is your personal prediction about the possibility of making a ceasefire deal this year?
Well, as anyone can see, the Russians on the front lines are using donkeys to get their artillery shells to the front lines. So yes, Russia needs to take a breather. And they will happily, I think, agree to a ceasefire. I imagine they want to do this prior to the May 9th Victory Day parade, just so they can consolidate their forces and have a big propaganda win. I don't know why May 9th is their most important holiday when Russia didn't exist during World War II. That was the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was one of the victors in World War II. The Soviet Union is gone. During World War II, 100% of Ukraine was occupied by the Nazis, but only 5% of modern-day Russia was ever occupied by the Nazis. I don't want to lecture you, you being a Ukrainian, and the history of World War II, but it's simply about propaganda. All of the events, all of the stupid wars that Russia has participated in the last 80 years, they just pretend like none of that happened. So concerning the ceasefire, I think Putin wants one so that he can continue making tanks, continue making armored vehicles, continue making missiles and FPV drones, because that's where the future of warfare is going. And once he's stockpiled 6 or 7 million FPV drones, create this new attack, this new wave of destruction that could potentially hit Ukraine this fall or this winter. Who knows? Maybe Vladimir Putin will shake hands with Trump and say, I promise not to start these wars again while you remain president. And the second Donald Trump leaves office or has a heart attack, then Putin will kick the wars off again, and this cycle will just repeat.
But you're confident that Putin will agree to Trump's proposal on a ceasefire this year. You're confident that this should be the case right now?
I don't think it matters what Putin agrees to with Trump, because Russia cannot unilaterally say we're done fighting this war, and then Ukraine has to also agree to it. Ukraine and Russia have to agree together to stop this war. Two sides fighting a war have to agree to a ceasefire. All of this nonsensical belief that the United States can directly negotiate with the Russians and get the Russians to agree with anything, and then the United States can impose this on Ukraine. No, they can't. Donald Trump is pretending like he can, hoping that the Ukrainians just do what he wants, but I don't think Russia can get a ceasefire unless they negotiate it with Ukraine. I mean, you can't just unilaterally call for a ceasefire and expect your enemy to stop firing on you.
And do you feel that Ukraine has its own seat on the negotiating table right now?
No. I mean, there's no debate here. Donald Trump is saying Russia holds all the cards and Ukraine is irrelevant in negotiation talks. This is absurd. This is offensive. As an American, I oppose this line of thinking and belief. To my Ukrainian friends, I apologize. My advice to Ukraine, if you ever feel like it's in your best interest, just tell Donald Trump no. If Donald Trump does something nice or helpful, then accept that help. But if Donald Trump tries to impose anything on Ukraine that Ukraine believes is not to their benefit, just tell Donald Trump no.
And in such case, if there is no ceasefire deal this year, is there a chance of confrontation between Trump and Vladimir Putin, for example?
I was hoping that. I think there's lots of points, and the military alliance that has grown the last 20 years between China and Russia is not going away. Any kind of delusional beliefs within MAGA that we can flip Russia, become their friend and ally against China, that's not how it works. It's democracies versus dictatorships. Putin and Xi are dictators who will never leave office. They will be ruling their countries until the day they die, however. So America's allies are the democracies of the world. Our allies are Canada, France, the United Kingdom, Germany. We should be partnering with them, working with them. And we might come back to this. Donald Trump might try and cozy up to the Russians, sweet talk them, believe that we can form this new grand alliance between the United States and Russia. It's just not going to work. I think there's way too many people in America who will reject this and fight this, people such as me. And I think there's a lot of people in Russia who are not too happy with the United States, given it's been our weapons the last 3 years, killing hundreds of thousands of their people. It's Ukrainian soldiers fighting bravely on the battlefield, but it's American Bradleys, American Abrams, American Patriots, American F-16s, I understand they were donated from other countries, but it's an American-made plane. So why is Donald Trump trying to do this? And he's just getting terrible advice from really stupid and evil people in the administration. And I'm hoping there's some kind of revolt within the national security apparatus of America, and somebody can reach Trump and pull him back from the precipice. Tell him that NATO is his best military alliance. NATO is the greatest guarantee of security for the free and democratic world. And all this talk about being friends with the Russians or working with the Russians is nonsense, and we need to stop it.
Also, the United Kingdom, France, and other European allies are ready to deploy 30,000 troops to Ukraine if there is a ceasefire deal. Do you feel that this plan can work with Vladimir Putin, can deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again?
It's better than nothing, but no, 30,000 troops will not be enough to keep the peace or the ceasefire. When you factor in Belarus's border, when you factor in the border with Sumy and Chernihiv, as well as the current contact front lines, this is not practical. This is a massive area in which Russia could launch an attack in the future at any point. 30,000 peacekeepers sounds nice, but I don't think that will deter the Russians in the future if they want to start this war up again.
And why doesn't President Trump want to deploy American troops on the ground in Ukraine? Why doesn't he want to play any kind of role in that? Because the US has the largest military, the most powerful military around the globe. Why doesn't he want to play any kind of role in that? Because the US can ensure Vladimir Putin does not attack Ukraine again.
Because Donald Trump doesn't really care about Ukraine. When he says, who can offer me more, who can offer me a better deal or more resources going forward, Ukraine is a smaller country with fewer wealth, fewer resources, fewer to offer Donald Trump and his new cohort of oligarchs that are forming here in the United States. This is offensive to people who care about human rights and democratic values, people who are shocked and outraged by the war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Russian military has committed. But Donald Trump doesn't care about people. He's just looking for the best financial deal for himself and his oligarchs, his ruling elites that have taken power here in Washington, D.C. So I wish I could give you, as an American, I wish I could give you better answers. I wish I could give you more certainty. But we're having a moment here in America. We're having an internal fight and a debate about what kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a country that respects the sovereignty of nations and the dignity of human life? Or do we just want to be a resource-grabbing empire, trying to enrich ourselves to the maximum benefit possible? That's the path we're currently on. I'm hoping we can divert that. Ukraine is our ally based on values. But Trump wants to be allied with Russia based on resources and dollars.
Also, President Trump confirms that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will come to the White House this Friday to sign an agreement on natural resources and reconstruction of Ukraine. What is your assessment of this agreement? We have a new information that there are some amendments to this agreement which should be more appropriate for Ukraine. What is your reaction to this?
Well, the initial deal was America just gets 50% of everything going forward. That was weird. The next version was the United States, for every $1 put into this fund, Ukraine has to pay back $2. It's really high. It's not good. So the most recent version of this agreement, the one that Zelensky says he will sign on Friday, there are incentives for America to invest, but America does not 100% control this resource fund. It is jointly controlled by both Ukraine and the United States. So Ukraine will have to agree to or sign off on any kind of deals or transfers that future administrations would have to make. But there are strong incentives that America has to invest in Ukraine in order to start getting Ukraine's resource revenue. So this is a Win-win for both the United States long-term and Ukraine. In addition, there is one line that vaguely talks about security guarantees. Zelensky insisted on that. He got that. In addition, there is no recognition that a debt is being paid. The language that Trump kept using that, we've given Ukraine $350 billion. Donald Trump, when he talks, just lies about everything. He makes up numbers. He does this on everything, but this is particularly offensive and stupid because it's so easily fact-checked. The true amount allocated by Congress is $180 billion. Only about $70 billion in direct aid has ever been given. So there is no claiming there's a debt that will be repaid. This fund being used going forward is all about future aid and future credit for Ukraine to potentially receive military aid or buy weapons that will be repaid through this fund with investment that is jointly controlled by both the United States and Ukraine. So now that I have all these most recent deals, this most recent information about this deal, if Zelensky thinks it's a good deal and wants to sign it, then I will support his decision. He's talked to the experts. He has all the facts.
And is there a chance that Ukraine can also negotiate a better peace deal, a better ceasefire deal with Donald Trump as it did with this natural resources deal?
I don't think the Russians are looking to negotiate a better deal for Ukraine or a worse deal for them. They're trying to get the maximum benefit possible, and Russia is happy to continue killing people and committing acts of terrorism until they get everything they want. If terrorism works and you're constantly being rewarded, then you have no incentive to stop. That's unfortunate. But Ukraine has their own leverage and negotiation tactics. I think Ukraine should continue striking these oil refineries and oil depots. I think they should go after other high-value targets. I don't think Ukraine should restrain themselves concerning international law or potentially what might be in democratic countries what we call a war crime. I'm not advocating that Ukraine kill civilians or target civilians, but there is certain civilian infrastructure that Russia has targeted in Ukraine, saying that it's in war, it's fair play to go after thermal power plants, for example. So I think Ukraine should reevaluate targets inside Russia to maximize economic pain. And then, Russia might be willing to negotiate and scale back their ambitions.
Let's cover also U.S. internal politics as our final topic. U.S. President Donald Trump says that some cabinet members are not really happy about Elon Musk's activity and his work in his commission. What is your assessment of this situation with Elon Musk invading the work of U.S. governmental agencies?
Elon Musk is an idiot, and he's on drugs, and he's just trying to cause as much trouble and fire as many people and do as much damage to the federal government as possible. To my fellow Americans, potentially anyone watching this, fraud is a legal term. If anybody in the United States government has committed fraud with your U.S. tax dollars, then you can investigate that, file criminal charges, and then punish that person. So Elon Musk has had over a month to look through all the books, all the agencies, and he has found zero fraud. He's tweeted a lot of lies and made up information, but if there's actual fraud, that is criminal, Trump's FBI can investigate it, Trump's Justice Department can file charges, and people can go to jail for fraud. The only thing Elon Musk has done is lie and make up stuff, terrorize ordinary people who are just trying to do their best to do their federal jobs, and he's ended programs he doesn't personally like. If Congress passed the law and allocated the money and it's being used as Congress mandated, then that is law. That is federal law that we have to adhere to. The executive branch executes the laws of Congress. If you don't like USAID, if you don't like the Department of Education, if you don't like the way federal tax dollars are being spent, however, then Congress has to vote on it. They have to debate, vote, pass a law, and end that funding. So at the moment, Elon Musk has found zero fraud because zero criminal charges have been filed against anyone. So in the United States right now, this is just absolute lunacy. People have lost their mind because they've been consumed by misinformation, by charlatans, by con men. Half the Trump administration are billionaires, and they're just there to destroy the federal government and enrich themselves. The United States has fallen. It's incredibly sad, incredibly depressing how many people have been lost to misinformation. And I mean, things are going to get worse in the United States before we have an awakening moment, and then we try and pull back from this.
And can Donald Trump turn against Elon Musk?
Yes, I think that eventually this is going to happen. Elon Musk is going to, Elon Musk's approval rating is like 20%. Like what he is doing right now is not popular with anyone. And I think Donald Trump knows this, and he's okay with it. He's okay with Elon Musk doing whatever he wants. And then when bad things happen, he'll just blame Elon Musk and potentially say he no longer has a role in this government.
And why does he keep him in the office?
Because Elon Musk gave Donald Trump $300 million to help Trump elect him president. And Elon Musk owns Twitter. And Elon Musk bends the Twitter algorithm to conduct information warfare operations for Trump. And if Trump were to upset or offend Elon Musk, then that information platform and Elon Musk's 200 million followers might turn against Trump. So, this is just strongman politics and egomaniacs fighting with each other and saying at the moment they have an alliance, but these two people actually do hate each other. Trump's been a politician running for office or in office for over 10 years now, and Elon Musk has only been on his side the last 5 or 6 months. This is a marriage of convenience. As long as they both think they're getting what they want, they will continue saying, "I love you" to each other, when in reality, these guys don't actually like each other, and they will eventually turn on each other.
And it is interesting that Trump did not provide Elon Musk with official position in the government, in his cabinet. Don't you think that the reason of that was because he was afraid, he had some concerns about Elon Musk activities, that he could be harmful for the US government?
No, that's for legal purposes. Elon Musk is trying to avoid being sued by anybody for what he's doing. So if he doesn't have an official position, then when you take him, it's obvious he's the one doing it, but he's trying to be cute because he doesn't have an official job. He can't officially be sued for what he's doing when he's the one doing it. It's stupid, but Elon Musk doesn't need to be Secretary of the Treasury or Secretary of Defense. Elon Musk is the CEO of 5 or 6 different companies, and for some reason, he can ignore all those companies and just live at the White House, basically. I don't know. Everything happening right now is stupid. Trump's polling numbers have dropped after his first month in office. Across the board, 5 or 6 different polls. It all shows Trump's approval rating is down 5 or 6% after 1 month. That's the equivalent of 8 million American voters changing their opinion on the guy since he took office. Trump has the lowest approval rating of any incoming president in history. Usually there's a honeymoon period and people are forgiving, but Donald Trump is doing so many unpopular and radical things right now. It is hurting his opinion polling. And at some point, I got to believe that Republicans in Congress will stop being afraid of the guy and they'll start acting independently of the executive branch.
Thank you, Jake, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Thanks for having me on.